But look, this is going to be a real moment. It's a moment that the Chancellor needs to show that he is serious. It's a moment the party needs to show that it's together. And if the budget doesn't deliver for the Conservative Party, we could see further fallout. I mean, look, I'm picking up lots of rumbling already behind the scenes from those on the right wing of the party saying whatever he does isn't going to be enough. So if they start saying that publicly, it looks difficult again for the Prime Minister.
It's the day and a few hours to go before the budget. It will affect how much money you have to spend, the public services you use, and perhaps who you'll vote for in the coming election. Let's talk to Times Radio's political editor, Kate McCann. Morning, Kate.
Morning.
So where are we is the budget done, do you reckon? Do you reckon Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt have a clear idea of everything that's going to happen as of 8 o'clock this morning?
Yeah, all the big things are tied down now, and that because we've had the forecast from those who are sending them over to the Treasury, the OBR, and we know that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have been locked in a room over the last couple of days trying to work out exactly how far they can go. And I think the big question left, Stig, because we know that tax cuts are going to come. We've talked about them at some great length on this station over the last couple of days and weeks. The big question is whether or not the Chancellor will have found enough money to do that income tax cut or just a cut to national insurance. National insurance is cheaper and it's less inflationary than cut in income tax, but it's also not as easy to translate to voters to just say on the doorstep, look, we've cut your income tax by 2p, which we know is what the Prime Minister is really hoping to do. But because it is expensive, you need to be able to find the cash for that. And while you could tinker around the edges and do things like the non-doms tax changes, which we expect the government may well look at, it could take something a little bit bigger if there isn't that headroom there. And that might get you into the realms of potentially cutting spending even further in the 5 years ahead, which I think would have some pushback, even if it didn't ever happen, which is a different thing entirely. But most of these projections for public spending don't ever really come off.
Are you struggling? We talked about this before, Kate. You talked about it with Jeremy Hunt on Sunday. We mentioned it yesterday. But I'm more than ever struck by this notion that in order to fund a tax cut, there might be cuts on public spending, when all of the polling and everything we hear on this radio station ourselves suggests that people don't want that. People don't want a public service cut in order to get a penny off income tax or a penny off national insurance. So why is it considered electorally wise to do that?
Well, at the heart of all of these decisions are the Chancellor's own fiscal rules, which are his rules, by the way. They're not made up by the OBR or anybody else. They are the Chancellor's own rules. And that essentially suggests that debt has to be falling over that 5-year period. And what ends up happening is that in order to meet that fiscal rule, the Chancellor does something in his budget like projecting lower spending in public sector departments over the next 5 years in order to meet the letter of the rule, but knowing full well, and the OBR probably know full well too, that it doesn't meet it in spirit, because what's likely to happen is the government will revise those spending plans further down the line. That's happened 9 out of 10 times, I think, in the last couple of fiscal events, that the government will later on spend more money. In projecting a lower spend, it gives the Chancellor more of that room to manoeuvre. It could be £5 or £6 billion, depending on what he decides to cut off public spending. But to take it back to your original point, Stig, even in the autumn statement, the spending cuts to public sector departments that were projected were on a similar line to what David Cameron suggested in the first years of austerity. Those unprotected departments like the courts and justice were already going to really struggle. Anything further than that, and we've been talking about the justice system already this morning on the programme, would have a huge impact and I think would be unsustainable. So it could also politically bind the hands of the next government. I mean, that way it may well be the Labour Party.
So that could be the point of this. The point is we're not going to win the election, so we might as well ruin it for the next government.
Well, I mean, there could be some politicking in there. I mean, it wouldn't be surprising in an election year. I think it's got more to do with meeting this fiscal rule to the letter, so the OBR signs the budget off. But what's a really interesting question is why Labour has signed itself up to the same fiscal rules and suggested that it would keep all of the tax cuts the government imposes, because it leaves very little room for Labour to be creative or to manoeuvre around what are quite fixed. Well, some economists say they're very kind of fixed and they're very restrictive. Other economists say they're very loose fiscal rules because they can be changed. But either way, they are creating a short-termism in this kind of environment, which isn't necessarily helpful.
No, but is also inevitable. One of the reasons why we're talking short-termism, Kate, is, of course, this question of when the election is going to be. We've had Labour and the Tories on today. It's fair to say there's a difference of opinion emerging on this subject. First up, Greg Hands. Are you ready for a May election if it comes? Do you think there's any sniff of actually there being a general election in May?
No.
Nope. Pretty clear. This was Labour's Jonathan Ashworth talking to Asma.
Well, I think everything the Conservatives are doing in terms of both their advertising on social media and their political positioning suggests to me that May is their preferred choice, and I think we are heading for a general election in May. And really, Rishi Sunak, I hope you get Rishi Sunak on Times Radio to put the question to him, because with respect to Greg Hands, he isn't the person who decides this. I'm not remotely undermining Greg Hands in that respect, but I mean, it's Rishi Sunak who makes these decisions, and I think it's going to be May, and I think Rishi Sunak now needs to name the date.
We would like Rishi Sunak on Times Radio, so if he is listening, I know he always listens between 8 and 8:30 every morning, then do come on. Kate, who do you believe, Greg Hands or Jonathan Ashworth?
I'm going to answer a different question.
Join the club. No one ever answers any of our
Jeremy
questions.
Hunt of you.
And I say that as a May girl. You know I'm a May girl. I've long been somebody who thinks that an election should happen in May. Whether or not it does is a very different question entirely. The Tories have suggested that they would like to push it as far as they can. There is, very little to suggest that things are going to get much easier for them. So why would you not hold on until the very last moment when you could still control some of the levers in government? There are those MPs who look at that argument and say, well, we're not really doing very much. Often Parliament is not sitting late into the night. It's not passing huge amounts of legislation. There isn't a lot going on. So what are you really using your time for? But, there are people who say if you wait and you go longer, it will be even worse for the Conservatives. And of course, Labour are absolutely up for a May election. They would like this to happen as soon as possible. I mean, yesterday they got a poll that showed in the Ipsos poll, the Tories had the worst result they'd ever had with that particular company. So, I mean, for Labour, they would be more than happy, I think, to go sooner.
Do you think we might know after the budget, on a serious note, that we might know as he stands up and pulls a gigantic gnarly tooth rabbit out of the hat and it's really game-changing, that would indicate a May election? Or also is there a chance that the budget goes down so well that they go, oh, you know what, this is as good as it's going to get, so we might as well make the move now?
Well, there's always a chance. I mean, I think it's very unlikely that the polls are going to shift significantly for the Tories, particularly around a fiscal event. I mean, remember the autumn statement offered up a 2 pence cut in national insurance, and there was absolutely no poll bump. In fact, things look to have got worse. So it's unlikely that you would see a complete reversal of fortunes. What you do tend to get, though, is a focusing of minds, if you like. The polls do tend to narrow as we head towards a general election event, because people start to think, well, how do I really feel? The big unknown is how many people will just not bother turning out at all and what effect that would have. And then the effect of parties like Reform, for example, on some Tory votes in some areas, whether or not that would be very damaging. But look, this is going to be a real moment. It's a moment that the Chancellor needs to show that he is serious. It's a moment the party needs to show that it's together. And if the budget doesn't deliver for the Conservative Party, we could see further fallout. I mean, look, I'm picking up lots of rumbling already behind the scenes from those on the right wing of the party saying whatever he does isn't going to be enough. So if they start saying that publicly, it looks difficult again for the Prime Minister.
It's going to be interesting. Is it going to be May? Is it going to be later in the year? We shall see. Kate, great to speak to you as ever. Kate McCann, our political editor.